Illinois Lives Matter. That's the theme of this year's Speakout. It turns out that that statement is an aspirational one. It is not one that reflects the reality on the ground here. While the incidence of abortion continues to decline, and it's declined steadily, significantly in the state of the last decade, it's 6% last year, thank God for that, Illinois still retains its title as the abortion dumping ground of the Midwest. Chicago has a higher murder per capita rate than Los Angeles and New York combined. And Illinois ranks 47th in the nation in the provision of services to persons with developmental disabilities. So the divide is widening between those who believe they are their brother's keeper and a government that acts only as the keeper of their brother's money. Now, I'm not going to overstate the case on Illinois because I don't need to. The problems we have exist everywhere because man exists everywhere. There is no utopia just outside the boundaries, the borders of the state of Illinois. However, the problem endemic to the human condition is particularly pronounced here. Someone always has to serve as the bad example, and Illinois has chosen to provide that example to the United States. And there is a reason that we find ourselves in this position, and the reason is because we have given in to unreason. As the great Christian apologist and convert to Catholicism, G.K. Chesterton observed in a column in the Illustrated London News during the darkness of the Great Depression, "He who has got used to unreason is ready for unkindness." In other words, when we get used to injustice, particularly institutionalized injustice, we are ready to usher in unkindness, even barbarism. Do you remember 5 years ago when the state of Illinois canceled its 92-year-long adoption contract with Catholic Charities soon after the civil unions law was passed and codified? Robin Ziegler, who's a spokesman for Attorney General Lisa Madigan, said at the time of that contract cancellation, as the explanation for the decision the Attorney General had made, quote, "Our focus remains on doing what is best for the care and welfare of children in the foster care system in Illinois." Okay, so for 92 years, the state said it was renewing the contract with Catholic Charities because it was in the best interests of children to do so. Then overnight, Lisa Madigan canceled the contract because it was doing what was in the best interest of children. The only problem with the logic there, the reason, is that Catholic Charities policies didn't change from 24 hours earlier when the state said it was operating in the best interest of the children. Likewise, nothing changed about the child's interests. But something changed for thousands of children in Catholic Charities foster care and the thousands of children Catholic Charities placed in loving adoptive homes. Their interests were sacrificed on the pyre of intolerance masquerading as tolerance. So he who has got used to unreason is ready for unkindness, and the Attorney General was. Speaking of adoption, you may know, because you probably see them on the roads, that 29 states in our country have these Choose Life license plates. Actually, when I was walking in, I saw the same thing I have on my car, which is the Choose Life license plate holder. And I'll get to why we only have holders in Illinois in a second. But these specialty plates, for those not familiar, is where residents pay a premium for their license plate, and a portion of the premium is distributed to organizations consistent with the mission of the plate sponsor. With Choose Life plates, then, the benefiting organizations are crisis pregnancy centers and other adoption service providers. Tens of millions of dollars have been raised through the voluntary purchase of these plates in 29 states to support CPCs and adoption service providers the nation over. Turns out Illinois has more than 100 specialty license plates. For example, there's a specialty plate in Illinois to support youth golf for the youth that make it to golfing age in Illinois. There is no Choose Life plate, but it hasn't been for lack of trying dating back to 2003. The effort has been led by pro-life heroes like Jim Finnegan, Joan Carroll Walsh, Jill Stanek, Tom Brecka, Peter Breen, Tom Morrison, long before they were state representatives, and many others. But two leaders in this cause deserve special attention and special mention in a story not enough people have heard or remember. And they are Reverend Scott and Janet Willis. Some people remember. But it's a story, institutional knowledge is an important thing. And this is a story that we should all recall or familiarize ourselves with and tell over and over again, so it is not lost in the annals of the state's ignominious history. After losing 6 children in a horrific car accident involving another driver who had obtained his CDL license illegally by bribing a Secretary of State office employee, the most egregious consequence of the George Ryan era corruption in Illinois. Scott and Janet Willis appeared at an African American church in 2003 on the south side of Chicago, and I remember because I was there, and said this, quote, 8.5 years ago, Janet and I lost 6 of our children in a terrible van accident. The tragedy, as the people of Illinois now know, was partially due to a licensing system in Illinois that had been abused for political greed and power. The system of licensing is not bad. The abuse of the system is what has been so destructive. We believe that offering this Choose Life specialty plate is one way the system can be cleaned up from its corrupt core and be used for good. A state senator running for U.S. Senate at the time called Choose Life license plates contentious. His name is Barack Obama. The good news is he is coming back to visit the scene of his state-level crimes on February 10th. So perhaps we can revisit this issue with the President when he speaks to the General Assembly on February 10th. I know State Representative Green and the other Republicans in the room are looking forward to that. But going back to the Choose Life license plate saga, though, particularly 2003, this critical year, part of the effort early on included a meeting with House Speaker Mike Madigan. He was House Speaker back in 2003, just as he is today, just as he was when Illinois was incorporated in 1818. Madigan, so I remember this vividly because I was there. It was Madigan and me and Reverend Scott and Janet Willis, and that's why we all got in to see him, because of Reverend Scott and Janet Willis, and Jill Stanek. And Mike Madigan spoke of his support of adoption, don't you know, because he adopted his daughter Lisa, and that's true, and I knew that going in. But I suggested to Madigan that that was great news to hear, because despite the suggestion that he had made to us that he is but one legislator in Springfield with just one vote, that I and the group with me knew him to be a very persuasive individual, and that if he wanted something voted up on the House floor, then that thing would get voted up on the House floor. And so we're going to go ahead and hold him to the standard of excellence that he has set for himself. That was the first and last time I was included in a face-to-face meeting. And of course, Speaker Madigan bottled up the Choose Life license plate legislation in 2003 in committee, and 13 years later the effort continues, and it has also been pursued heroically, valiantly by the Thomas More Society, by Tom Brecka, by Peter Green. We also met with the Senate President at the time, Emil Jones, and that was even more kind of morbidly entertaining. Emil Jones it was kind of spitballing other messages that could be on the license plate rather than Choose Life with us, offering suggestions. Maybe we could have Choose Adoption. And I said, well, we don't want to promote, the idea is adoption is a loving option. The idea is not give your kid away. So you see the nuance there. And the interesting thing is, John said, well, what if Planned Parenthood wanted, or Personal PAC wanted to choose abortion plate? And we said, great, good luck. We'll see who sells more plates. We like the competition. So all of the arguments that were offered, because they were really trying to regulate our speech, it wasn't a time, place, manner restriction, because they offered the plate as a public forum for political speech because of all these other specialty plates. It was really because they simply disagreed with us, and that's unfortunately the protocol in Illinois. If you disagree and you are not in the majority, you will be silenced. The short of the story, though, about Choose Life license plates is this, because I want to go back to Reverend Scott and Janet Willis. They brought their grace to the General Assembly. I mean, imagine this, 8 years after you lose 6 children, the proximate cause of which is the corruption of a government you finance. They came to the General Assembly in support of a positive development from the incalculable tragedy they endured. Their views were humored, but not considered, because voluntary support of adoption service providers through a forum the state had made available to speech was too, in a word, contentious. You know of the good work that CPCs do for children and families alike. So think how many more children and families could have been served by those who live their lives for others with the resources this license plate would have unleashed. He who has gotten used to unreason is ready for unkindness. In 2009, when I was running that ill-fated campaign for governor, Representative Green was so generous to bring up, I got an email from a friend asking if I had seen an executive order issued by then ill-equipped Governor Pat Quinn, who is also a Catholic. You know, I got Chesterton here, I got Pat Quinn here. We've got a big tent in the Catholic Church, perhaps too big. But Pat Quinn issued an executive order that would allow the public sector unions to try and organize the state contracted home health care workers in Illinois. I had seen something about this executive order, but I just took it kind of to be another public sector union gambit and really didn't fully appreciate the implications. That changed after I met a group of parents, including a woman named Pam Harris, who had a child, had a son with developmental disability. All of the parents of children with developmental disabilities explained to me how the home health care worker program in Illinois actually worked in practice. The state provides a rather modest stipend to a home health care worker for a developmentally disabled child for that child's care. The home health care worker, as it turns out, is most often one or both of the child's parents, because of course, who has a bigger stake in the care of the child than their parents? So this was the rare state program in its functioning at the time before Quinn's executive order that was actually in alignment with the interests of Illinois families, and Illinois families specifically, and civilization generally. So of course that could not be abided. What Quinn's executive order would have done, would have allowed, is to close the shop of home health care workers and her parents into the Service Employees Union. Because, of course, the Service Employees Union is always looking to force more dues-paying members into their ranks, Quinn supported by those unions. So think about this for a second. The parent of a child with a developmental disability would be forcibly represented by a union against their child. I'm sorry, Joey, you don't get fed right now. I'm on one of my 2 15-minute breaks. Have you read our collective bargaining agreement? The courtesy and customer service of the DMV for the developmentally disabled. He who has gotten used to unreason is ready for unkindness. Pam Harris and the other parents were going to have none of it. They were not going to let SEIU business agents come between them and their children. So Pam Harris took her case all the way to the United States Supreme Court, and in a seminal United States Supreme Court decision in the summer of 2014, 5 years after Quinn's executive order, Pam Harris and similarly situated families in Illinois were victorious. I thought I'd got to give you at least one and they live happily ever after story. But unfortunately, the news generally is not so happy, as I mentioned at the outset, with Illinois' situation in terms of providing services for the developmentally disabled and really the truly vulnerable. Whether people need temporary help or long-term assistance, Illinois is not getting the job done. And for those social service providers that are otherwise getting the job done, Illinois isn't holding up its end of the bargain. As you probably saw this week, Lutheran Social Services announced they're laying off some 750 employees, nearly 43% of their staff. They're shutting down a number of programs in the area of senior services and addiction services because the state owes them $6 million for services already rendered, and Lutheran Social Services can no longer float the state. Catholic Charities is suggesting similar reductions because the state is in arrears to Catholic Charities to the tune of $16 million. And so you've probably seen the news reports, particularly this week, the State of the State address, where you are hearing from social service providers calling for the governor in particular, but the governor and the General Assembly generally, to get a budget done, to raise taxes, to make social services funding a priority. So let me close by informing this real-time discussion and the fact-free news reporting about it. $214 billion in debt, $30 billion in assets. $214 billion in debt, $30 billion in assets. Remove the B's, so these numbers are fathomable, and you've got a 7-to-1 debt to total assets ratio. That's the state of Illinois. You don't rack up $214 billion in debt overnight. And in fact, for those calling on just to pass a budget, like there's some magic to passing a budget, Illinois hasn't passed a constitutionally balanced budget in 14 years. They haven't been passing budgets, they've been passing fairy tales, which is how you continue to rack up billions and billions of dollars in debt and how you find yourself unable to pay social service providers or state vendors more generally. Illinois has the 5th highest total tax burden in the country, according to the Tax Foundation, and the worst credit rating in the country, according to everyone. So think through this with me because I need you to go help others do similarly. My legislative representatives and yours, with some exceptions, but generally speaking, particularly at the leadership level, tell me they're committed to helping the truly vulnerable, those as I said, who need a temporary hand up or who need long-term assistance through no fault of their own. We have $214 billion in debt. So after all of the taxing and spending, and borrowing and spending, if the truly vulnerable were a priority for all of the politicians who say they are their priority, then how could we be 47th in the nation in providing services to them and be in tens of millions of dollars in arrears to social service providers providing those core programs to them? Do you see how that's in conflict? Do you see how that's a contradiction? So how do you reconcile this incongruity? Pretty easy. How do you make it make sense? They're lying. That's how you make it make sense. They're lying to you. They're lying to us. And they've been lying to everyone, including social service providers who just want somebody to do something. And so sometimes the targets of their ire are the wrong targets. They've been doing this for generation and generation after generation. Because, as I said, you don't put together that kind of balance sheet in a day or the last 12 months or even the last decade. This takes real work, real coming together, bipartisan cooperation, to borrow a phrase. So just going back to the Choose Life license plate matter, Illinois state government doesn't spend the money it takes from you, as they say they will, while preventing you a channel to voluntarily spend your money for the benefit of others. He who has gotten used to unreason is ready for unkindness. In close, the good news is that the antidote for unreason and unkindness are the reason people in this room with the servant's heart and those within your circles who are similarly disposed. I am not the mindless happy talk guy, but I am not the abandon all hope guy either. As I like to say, I'm not a cynic, I'm not an optimist, I'm a realist. I look at the glass and I don't say it's half full, I don't say it's half empty, I say it's twice as big as it needs to be. So I have to tell you what I think to be true. Illinois has, in many ways, and I mean this term, become a barbaric place to live, the way we treat each other. But that need not be our destiny. What you do matters, your civic engagement matters, your charitable work matters, the opinion leadership you provide within your circles of leadership, within your circles of influence matters. We need people who know better, who come to conferences like this on a Saturday afternoon to share their knowledge, to collectively demand better, and to labor for better. I find myself in these times not only thinking about what Chesterton said almost 100 years ago, but going back to read passages from Whittaker Chambers' Witness, one of the most important books of the last 100 years. If you haven't read it, you should. To remind myself that the point, one of the points I think, in this mortal coil, is to fight for what you think is right, even if you think you're going to lose. That's what Whittaker Chambers did. He turned out to be wrong. He wasn't on the losing side. And that's why you should do it, because you never know. You may be wrong about